today we're going to be talking about another phase of that bill, which is Camp Lejeune toxic water. So basically our Marines, sailors, spouses, children, even children that were in utero, and civilian employees that worked or drank water at Camp Lejeune between 1953 and 1987. The different stories that we've heard, the different illnesses, we're going to cover a lot of those. And the main reason why that's so important is because that's about to be enacted into law. Again, once, if and when it's signed by the president, hopefully we'll have some understanding of that soon. But that would provide a private right of action for these military families. I think conservatively, the government has estimated close to 1 million people would have a claim. And that would be for, if a loved one has already passed away from their exposure to toxic water at Camp Lejeune, the different illnesses. We've talked about them before. We've got about a dozen different types of cancers: leukemia, Hodgkin's, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, certain cardiac type diseases, female infertility, birth defect, a number of other diseases and illnesses. So basically, once that's signed into law and these military families now have the ability to file a claim, well, where do you file a claim? What can you do? And we're just got to kind of iron out some of those things, explain kind of the roadmap for today is 3 things. What years would you have had to serve there, been drinking water there? Who are we talking about, right, that has a potential claim? What is the claim for, right? And what sorts of illnesses or diseases would apply or would be allowed to file a claim? And then where do you file a claim? So whenever you sue the government, whenever you've got a claim against the government, there are a number of procedures that go into place that are different than if, say, Casey and I were involved in a civil suit, right? Our hypothetical lawsuit here. So,
yeah, just to confirm, I am not suing Chris. It would be a poor decision to sue a lawyer. I think, Chris. I don't know for sure.
We would have nothing to fight over. So
yeah, we're on good terms still. So it's all
right.
good. We do have a long way to go, Chris, but we are going to talk about all of that, obviously. But we do want to let you know, we want to hear your story. Chris wants to hear your story if you have it. And if you can't call in, that's okay. We understand. There's still a video version of the show, by the way, so you may not be hearing this live on 104.5 WOKV, but you might find the video version on Chris's website. That's thanks to Justin at Nova Productions. He's hooking that up for us. Even when we're live, he's here at 6 in the morning, folks. It's not just me and Chris. So you can still find that video version. You can go back and listen, WOKV.com. So all kinds of places to still find this information and then reach out to Chris, which you can do. Case, C-A-S-E, at brochulaw.com. You can send him an email really about anything you may need his help with, but this as well, or you can give him a call, 904-201-1771. Chris wants to help you with anything you might have in military law, anything like that, or just civilian law. He can probably help you with that as well. But Chris, you talked about it. Let's get into it. Camp Lejeune, for the people that don't understand, don't know, go ahead and give the people just an overview of the situation. People that have never heard of it, explain to them what this place is and what has happened there a long time ago that is still a huge problem.
The kind of starting point would be to take a look back, over time, what happened and what we kind of know now. But basically that there were 3 separate groundwater sources that were contaminated at Camp Lejeune. So Hadnot Point, Tarawa Terrace, and Holcomb Boulevard. Those were the groundwater systems that would have been contaminated. The contaminants that they found, and these are studies like over and over and over the years, right? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not. I didn't do any field work or ground surveys over there. These are all from different studies from over the years, but they found different things. Was it the underground tanks that were leaking into the water supply? There are stories. One of the attorneys out of South Carolina that led a lot of this litigation, a lot of the law that will lead to some of this litigation. His name's Ed Bell. He's heard stories. I've heard him talk about people dumping fuel, like excess fuel, into the in and around that Camp Lejeune area. There are other stories of these basically these testing where they found layers of fuel above a water supply. So those stories basically evolved into, well, how did they have all of these different illnesses and diseases that are affecting all of these military families? You've got families that all have the same types of cancers, the same types of weak bones, the same types of neurological issues, female infertility, right? Thyroid problems. They're all somehow interconnected, but for years the government didn't tell them what was truly going on. And at some point in time, at least my understanding was that they actually told our military families that the water was safe to drink, and that the funny taste was actually just from the minerals, right? Extremely rich in minerals. That's what they've allegedly told our military families. So that's kind of where this bill and this private right of action. Anytime you hear me say private right of action, that's really what the bill says. Just think you have the ability to file a claim. You have the ability to file a lawsuit. But that's where it really derives from. And that would be for service members that served from 1953 to 1987. So you had to have been on Camp Lejeune up in North Carolina. It's a base on the East Coast, so right near, ironically, Jacksonville, North Carolina. But basically, if you, as a veteran, your loved one, your spouse, your kids, a relative, let's say, I'm not entirely sure if there were, other relatives living on base at that time, civilians, right, civilian employees. If you're drinking water for 30 days, the studies show that there were some illnesses and diseases where our military were affected after 1 to 3 months of exposure. And interestingly, sort of all of the different types of military claims that I represent and help service members and veterans and military families with, lending, housing, SGLI, VGLI, VA disability. I've heard different stories from those that served at Camp Lejeune during that time. And one of the things that is interesting is they all, as you start to piece together the puzzle, they all relate in some way, right? Because you're hearing the stories and all of the illnesses or diseases kind of, they just seem similar, which is ironic, because you see these parts of the country where you might have a one-off issue with certain things, but to have a really closely, if you looked under the microscope, and you'd see everybody in this one area has certain illnesses and diseases, it's startling. So I think that's why the government has now recognized that there were just close to 1 million people that would have been drinking that water that probably have a claim, and that's why they need to do something more than just offering VA disability benefits, right? I mean, you hear some of the stories of, you've got 6 family members that have died of cancer. You've got children born with without limbs, right? You've got all of these different stories. So one of the main things that this is doing is it's providing justice for those families, because of the fact that in the civil realm, the only way that you can provide justice is justice equals money, right? Because we're not talking about criminal law here. There's nothing that we can do as civilian attorneys to help, prosecute the government or something. I mean, that doesn't even make sense, right? So the government recognizes this harm and what they did that was obviously wrong for our military families, and that justice that they're allowing now for military families to file a claim in this particular example, justice equals, potential money. So I don't think that that's going to make a family that's been affected with cancers and leukemia and birth defects and miscarriages and female infertility whole again. But it's at least the government trying to make it right.
Yeah, after all these years, right? So just to kind of recap what you said, Chris, 1953 to 1987, the government understood that there was a problem with the water at the bare minimum, probably more, but that it should not have been consumed or bathed in or anything like that. And it was for all this time. And now we are in the year 2022, and something happened that at the tail end of 1987, we're just now making it right the best we can, obviously, to the point you just made. You can't fully make it right. But what's been going on since 1987? Like, why are we just now here, I guess, in your opinion?
From my understanding, the true nature of Camp Lejeune toxic water didn't really truly, become public until sometime around 2012. And the VA, obviously, as we sit here today, they've recognized that there's some sort of presumptive service connection between these illnesses and that service time period. The equivalent would be, think about like Agent Orange in Vietnam, right? Or, there are other ones that will hopefully be able to provide greater relief to service members and military families. You think of the burn pit ones, Gulf War, there are certain ones, but basically when you think of some sort of presumptive service connection, just think of that as the causal link, right? That is if you took somebody that served in one of these wars or one of these eras and they now live with one of these illnesses or disease, the causal link is that their service caused this disease, right? Which in law is usually one of the hardest things to prove, because you've got to prove that causal link, that causation, right? That this illness was caused by this conduct or, this contaminant in the case of Camp Lejeune. And really what Camp Lejeune boils down to is that they've got fuel and other toxins that have leaked into the water supply, and benzene and these other known carcinogens. The levels are so high that, you didn't need to be there for 2 decades to potentially fall victim to this, because your body can't necessarily process that. And that's not from me. That's generally known throughout, I think, based on the scientific community's findings in some of these cases, that the amount of exposure in this case is extreme.
Absolutely. 104.5 WOKV Jacksonville's News and Talk, live on a Sunday morning. Casey Kurtz with the guy Chris Brochu of Brochu Law, and we're talking all about Camp Lejeune. Chris, you mentioned it a little bit, some of the illnesses and injuries and things that have come from Camp Lejeune, but if you can, give an expanded list of some of the things these people have been dealing with. Not everyone's dealing with the same things, obviously, but some of the diseases that have came out of Camp Lejeune.
The primary ones, that you'll hear about are obviously around a dozen types of different cancers, right? If you've got a cancer and you know that you were either a civilian, a child, or a spouse, again, it could be an ex-spouse, it could be you could be a adopted child, you could be a stepchild, you could just have been there as long as you were drinking the water, right? I've got some clients that I have received calls from where they were, literally kids, like they were 0 to 3 years old when they were there, and now they're in their 40s and they've got significant health problems. But the biggest thing is that there are about a dozen types of cancers: leukemia, multiple myeloma, Hodgkin's, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The cancers would include bladder, breast, cervical, esophageal, kidney, lung, ovarian, liver. The list is actually even more extensive than that: brain cancer. And then the biggest one is, and this is what I had heard from one of the info sessions where I was kind of talking with some other attorneys that were helping service members with these claims, was I hadn't realized this, and I hadn't in my research really come across this, but Camp Lejeune actually had like 5 cemeteries that were dedicated to children that had passed away. It's actually extremely sad, but basically there was the type of birth defects, female infertility, miscarriages that this contaminated water, the type of harm that it caused, there were a ton of kids that were affected, that had born with cardiac issues, that had been born without a limb, or maybe they had a late-term miscarriage, things like that. So the biggest thing is that if you think that you have some sort of illness or disease that relates back to that, let's talk about it. Let's see if there's a conversation we can have to kind of look at the medical records, look at the medical opinion, see if there's an expert that we can discuss and try to make that causal connection. Some of the other ones include renal toxicity, again, cardiac effects, scleroderma, Parkinson's, neurobehavioral effects. There are other cancers and health conditions that we could talk about, but the biggest thing is that if you have any illness or injury or disease that you believe, stems from that time period, you definitely want to take a look. Your ability to file a claim once this is signed into law will be for a limited amount of time. So you don't, this isn't something that you want to say, I'll revisit in 5 years if this gets worse. I mean, you may only get one shot. So it doesn't even have to be me. Call somebody that does these types of cases and just figure out what your rights are.
For sure. And let's stay there for a second before we hit this first break, Chris. You talked a lot about like the children there. And I think that's an interesting part of this, because I think most people, when they're hearing your talk, they're like, okay, the military service member is probably the bigger part of this. But we're going to talk about this throughout the month of July and more to come on this. But the conversations that me and you have had off the air about this is there's a lot, you've said it, estimated 1 million people or more could potentially have illness stemming off of this. And some of them, kids potentially that may not be close to their family, or potentially another scenario you brought up to me would be like an ex-spouse who was there no longer married to the service member, or the other way around. But there might be people out there right now that know they have an illness like this and have no idea why. How do you think that plays out? Because you're obviously trying to reach the most people you can to tell them about this, but there has to be people out there that don't know that that's why they have a certain illness, right?
It's a great point. I mean, there are probably scores of people out there that have, no genetic link to the illness or disease that they have, but they've lived with it their entire life and nobody really knows why. This type of claim is very unique. So you hear me say it all the time. I mean, my show is called Protecting Military Families with Chris Brochu. The main reason why I always tell, when people say, well, what type of law do you practice? What do you do? The main reason why I say, well, I protect military families is because I do represent service members. I do represent veterans. When we've got a Military Lending Act claim, that's, either a service member or somebody that's now a veteran that it arose when it was a service member. When I've got an SGLI or VGLI claim, the service member or veteran has passed away, and now I'm working with their spouse because their insurance proceeds won't be paid out, or they're maybe being paid to someone else, which we think is improper. VA disability, depending on the type of VA disability impairment rating that the veteran receives, their family may, get other types of benefits. This case is very unique because those cases have the ability to help a military family, even if it's directly related to the harm sustained by the service member or veteran, right? That service member or veteran was in an accident, in Fallujah, and, now they are disabled and we are getting benefits for their caretaker, who is their spouse, right? This particular type of case, the spouse is the injured party as well, right? So you've got the spouse that's drinking toxic water that has had female infertility issues. So it's very, very unique. And this is where it affects literally the entire military family because of the fact that nobody even knew that this water was harmful. So you've got mothers that are drinking it that are carrying their babies to term. They don't realize that's poisoning their babies. They've got kids that are, think of the amount of kids that were living in that area. You've got veterans that are, from what I've heard, as soon as you get out of Parris Island boot camp, your first stop in some of these eras, I think the guys I've talked to were like late 70s, early 80s. The first stop for their training was Camp Lejeune, right? This is for Marines, right? So I think it really, if you know of someone that has one of these things and they have any connection to that area or to the military, just look into it. Just call someone, figure out if you may fit into this group. The amount of calls that I've received from people, even if they're like, oh, I didn't, but I was at this base, but I know my buddy was there. I was at this base. I know, my girlfriend was there, right? Her husband was stationed there. Let's say, because a lot of military wives have friends all over the country. If you know somebody, tell them, please spread the word. Again, just spread the word, and that way they can make the call on their own and, really try to make it as widely known as possible, especially because there's so many civilians that potentially have claims.
Absolutely. And Chris wants to help you. If you have a story, he wants to hear it, 904-201-1771, or give us a call right now, 855-765-1045. Don't go anywhere, though. We have more to do on the other side in the 7 o'clock hour. We'll talk more about it. If you have a claim, how can you file it? What can you do? Chris will tell you, and we will explain to you what you can do. This is 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We'll be right back. And we are back on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk on a Sunday morning, live protecting military families. Casey Kurtz with you with our guy, Chris Brochu, owner of Brochu Law. Chris, we got to do this right now because we didn't do it in the first segment, but it is the 7 o'clock hour. Tell the people about your second opinion that you pride your business on, please.
Casey, the second opinion is exactly like you'd see if you were at a doctor's visit and maybe you didn't agree with the treatment that was prescribed, or maybe you wanted to try an alternative, method or something like that. So essentially, when a military family has been told by the VA or their VSO, hey, 30% is all you're entitled to, or 10% or 0%, or, maybe you don't have a claim at all, or whatever it is. What we do is we take a look, and this is for VA disability appeals. This is for SGLI, right? Service member group life insurance, veterans group life insurance, military lending cases, Camp Lejeune. We get a call, consultation's free, right? We're not like one of those firms that charges you just to talk to you. If you give us a call, we're going to talk to you about your legal issue. If we decide that, we review your military benefits and determine that there's nothing that we can do to further assist you, well, there's no charge to your military family. If we get a call from you and say, okay, there's a military benefit we can assist with, there's a legal right that we think you're entitled to, a legal claim, what we'll do is if the veteran, service member, military family that calls us, if we decide to work together, we'll enter into a fee agreement, contingent fee agreement, and there's no fee unless you win. So basically, the only way we get paid is if you get paid, right? We advance all costs on behalf of military families and consumers. And if you've ever been told, hey, this is all you're entitled to, hey, you don't have a claim, right? You've got this denial, please call someone. We're happy to speak with you. The other thing to remember is, and this is big because we've got military that have SGLI and VGLI policies, and I preach about this all day long because I want our military families to know their rights. Everybody is prepared. Our military families particularly are extremely prepared, but there are certain things that if you know kind of how they work and what's coming down the line, you can put yourself in a position where you won't be caught off guard. And because our military life insurance policies and our federal employee life insurance policies are very similar, they're sister statutes, the biggest thing to remember is if you submit a death certificate and a beneficiary claim form and you don't receive a check for those policy proceeds within 30 days, that's a red flag. You need to speak with an attorney. And the main reason is there's no reason if you've submitted everything and you haven't been paid, there's no reason they should be delaying unless they've provided you with some reason, which again, you may need an attorney anyway, right? If they're gearing up for a denial, if they're, got somebody's contesting it, right? So those are some of the things that I like to tell our military families to be aware of. And that goes for civilian policies too. If you have a life insurance claim, and that's a lot of what I do, state claims, federal claims, I actually take them throughout the country. If I've got a case outside of the state of Florida, I'll use local counsel, so long as most of the time these arise in federal court, so long as the federal judge allows me to, right? They usually have to permit you to. So if you're wondering if you've maximized your military benefits, if you're wondering if you left anything on the table, feel free to give us a call, 904-201-1771. Again, 904-201-1771. You can also reach out, case, C-A-S-E, at brochulaw.com. And again, my last name phonetically is Bravo Romeo Oscar Charlie Hotel Umbrella. So case at brochulaw.com. We're happy to speak with you. Everything we do is on a contingency fee basis. If you have a question about anything, it's all contingent. We're not going to charge you up front. If we decide to work together, obviously we'll have to enter into a fee agreement. We advance all costs, and the only way we get paid is if you get paid. That's a really sort of broad overview about what we do. We do some civilian and consumer claims too, but if you ever have a question, please feel free to give us a call.
Absolutely. Give him a call or send him an email. And by the way, while you're on Chris's website, brochulaw.com, you can check out a video version of the show. Me and Chris sitting here live on a Sunday morning. You can check it out thanks to Justin at Nova Productions, hooking us up with the video every episode, or listen back on WOKV.com. This is 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. Casey Kurtz and Chris Brochu. And we're going to talk now, Chris, more about Camp Lejeune, and let's talk about somebody sustained one of these illnesses or injuries, and now is the opportunity. Like you said, you might only get one shot at it. I know you have a growing list of people that you have talked to about this, but if somebody right now has figured out that they need to contact you or contact another lawyer, whatever, they need to contact somebody, how do they go about doing that right now? What's the procedure, since it's not yet a law, correct?
It still needs to be signed into law by the president. The biggest thing is identify who in your group, right, who in your military circle has these types of illnesses, that was living or stationed at Camp Lejeune between 53 and 87. Let them know if that pertains to you and your family and you suffered from these illnesses or diseases. This is something that you have to put on your radar. And the biggest thing to know is that when you sue the federal government, it's different from a lawsuit that arises in, state court against an insurance company or against a corporate defendant, right? So one of the things that's really interesting about this new bill is that you have to file a claim similar to a Federal Tort Claims Act claim, which means you have to basically submit a form. And I believe under the statute, the form in this particular scenario would be submitted to the Navy, which makes sense because if you're a Marine or a sailor and you have, say, a TSGLI claim, for instance, you'd submit that to your branch of service, which in that case would be the Navy. In these particular cases under the Camp Lejeune bill, the Honoring Our Pact Act, you'd submit a claim and the Navy would have 6 months to review it. And again, I know that seems like an absolute eternity, right? 6 months. But you got to remember, folks, when the government gets a claim, they got to kind of work it up the chain and review it. And it really does make sense, right? I mean, our agencies are living, breathing organisms. That doesn't mean that the government is less efficient, right? That they are efficient. It's just they've got so many moving parts that they've got to work through the claims. And they've got some great attorneys on their side. But again, the government has admitted wrongdoing here. And if you've got an illness or a disease, you can give it a shot. I mean, what's the worst that happens? They say no. I mean, I don't know if you're too proud to do it yourself, I mean, at least do it for your family.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And Chris, we talked about it a little bit in the first segment, but it sounds like at a minimum, 1 million people might have a case here. How are they going to handle, like, it's 1 million people, we understand the number, but that's one person filing a case, and then you have to have somebody settle that case. So that's 1 million cases. That's got to be a long process that this is going to eventually take, right? To finally get your compensation.
My understanding is that Congress would set aside an amount of dollars that would potentially go into this pool, and maybe they haven't done that yet, but I think that's probably where this is headed. And again, the United States Attorney's Office, the assistant United States attorneys, right, at the federal level, they're, the prosecutors, but they also represent the government, right? So just kind of thinking about that they would be the ones that represent the government in this instance. They're really good attorneys. They are very competent, but they're going to be dealing with a lot of cases. And I think that it's going to be really difficult on that district, because basically if you have a claim, you've got to file it in North Carolina, particularly the Eastern District of North Carolina, which is, one district court. So if we were in Florida, for instance, we have 3 different federal districts. We've got Northern District of Florida. When you think of Northern District, think of Pensacola, Gainesville, right? Those are some divisions of the Northern District of Florida. We've got Middle District of Florida. That's where we live here. Those divisions would be Jacksonville, Ocala, Orlando, Tampa, Fort Myers. And then you have Southern District of Florida. So you've got, Miami, you've got Fort Lauderdale division, and I believe there are obviously several others. But basically what you're going to be doing up in North Carolina is you file a claim up there, you file a lawsuit up there. I think they're going to have to bring in some attorneys out of D.C. to help the government out. But again, the government, they work well and they are great attorneys, but I just don't, if you've got one of these injuries or illnesses that they've said it's essentially a presumptive service connection, if you served here and you have this illness or injury, it's presumed that you got it there. I think that's going to be the causal link that you need. Now, some of the more difficult claims will be the ones that aren't necessarily recognized under the act, that you have to hire an expert or do different things. And again, this isn't legal advice, folks. I'm not telling you, oh, Chris told me I get $1 million. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am telling you is that if you served or your loved one did in that time period, and you have one of these illnesses or diseases that has impacted your life or the life of a family member or friend or relative, you should try to file a claim, because at the very least, they just say no, right? I mean, you can try, and they're all contingent, so it's not like you're going to end up owing money if you lose. But it's really going to be quite interesting to see how the federal government handles these types of claims, especially, if they had 1 million lawsuits tomorrow. The largest civil suit right now that I'm aware of with the most amount of claimants would be the 3M litigation. So that's the litigation for the dual-ended combat earplugs. In that particular case, I think there were over 300,000 military families, veterans that had filed claims against 3M. I think that this is about to dwarf that significantly.
Yeah, it sounds like it definitely could. 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We are protecting military families with Chris Brochu. Chris, we just talked about there's going to be a lot of cases, and this is a thing that's going to play itself out. But if someone is in need of assistance, how will they go about finding a lawyer that can represent them here, and what does that look like financially?
Well, part of the reason why I'm excited to help military families is the fact that the team that I work with and that I've kind of established with these claims, we represent military families. We're not just, dabbling in this because it's the new shiny object. This is what we do, right? So the military families that have these SGLI claims and Military Lending Act claims and all these different things, we're helping military families with housing issues and lending issues and SGLI and things like that. This is another type of claim that fits in that wheelhouse, right? We're contending with, your personnel file and your medical record that's probably housed at the VA. Well, I'm VA accredited, so we've got access to that, right? We've got that. The other firms that we co-counsel with have litigated against the federal government, have litigated against for a number of different cases. One in particular that I work with helped Wesley Black against the VA, right? That was that case that he was misdiagnosed with IBS, and it turned out it was cancer. So we've got some really good co-counsel that we work with, and those relationships are important, right? Because you've got to find an attorney that understands the dynamics of filing a claim against the government, filing a claim with the Navy, litigating it in federal court, right? Those are all sort of unique things. So it's important just when you call an attorney, ask them, well, what do you do for these types of cases? How many of these types of cases have you seen? Do you represent military families, right? I mean, the amount of advertising that's going on right now on Facebook and Google, most of these marketing companies, they're not lawyers, and they're basically attaching onto this because it's the newest bill. Call an attorney that does these types of things, right? It doesn't even need to be me, but just make sure that whoever you're speaking with is well-tuned in what's going on, because you want to set yourself up with an opportunity to present your case. And to your point, Casey, earlier, because the litigation arises in North Carolina, Eastern District, you're going to have to file these after you submit your claim to the government, to the Navy, right? You're going to have to file a lawsuit potentially in the Eastern District of North Carolina. So for those of us that take cases all over the country, we're going to have local counsel in North Carolina. We're going to have the ability, as long as the court permits it, for us to practice and represent for those cases only, right? It's not going to be this broad ability to practice there. It's just going to be like, if the court permits it, okay, yep, you can represent these individual claims, through the process. And that's really important too, because a lot of times when consumers and military families go to hire an attorney, they might say, oh, well, this firm is in Florida, my issue's in North Carolina, I can't hire a Florida attorney. That's not correct. There are firms that take cases all over the country, and they may be in a state that's outside of the state where they're actually litigating. So
yeah, absolutely. So Chris can help you in that scenario. If you want to reach out for his assistance, you can do that, 904-201-1771 or case, CASE, at brochulaw.com. Chris, we're going to spend most of the month of July talking about this topic, going deeper into it. We're going to give a lot of good information as we go along. We do have one other thing we're doing in July. We'll tell you about that in just a second, but I want to ask you this, Chris. You have made it clear to me that this is important to you. We're going to do a lot of episodes on this. How excited are you that you're going to be able to help these military families finally get some justice they've deserved for a long time?
It's just a reoccurring theme, right? You have Agent Orange families that didn't receive their benefits until the 90s. You have burn pit families that have been basically what seems like they haven't had a voice until this Honoring Our Pact Act. You see the barriers that have been put up against these military families, and time again, they're rejected, they're outcast, they are just, these families don't give up, and that's why there's nobody that is a better client to have, because of the fact that they've provided so much for our country and expect nothing. And I don't think there's a better client to represent than that. I mean, it's difficult to find, if you're a military family, right? And even the family at home, right? Your loved ones overseas, the family here at home is doing just as much, keeping the family together, keeping that link alive. And it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to help out as much as we can. And we're all part of it, right? Like, there's no way that one firm or one attorney could represent a million clients, right? So it's not, hey, how do we hoard all of this, for ourselves? That's not it at all. How do we spread the word? How do we get this information out there to the masses so that everybody that's been affected, that's had a life-altering event related to this illness or disease, directly related to this toxic water, how do we make sure they get their day in court? How do we make sure they get their justice? And I just think that the more stories we hear, the more we can connect the dots, and the more we can paint the picture, which will eventually help down the road, because we'll be able to present that argument in court better, because we know what's going on and who was there and what types of things these different families, right? We've got a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle right now on the ground, upside down. We're piecing together little by little. If you want to tell us your story, we want to hear it. Please call me. I'm available. We'll set up a time that's convenient for you. We want to hear your story. We want to hear, even if you knew someone that was there or somebody that was affected, give us a call. We're here for you.
Absolutely. 904-201-1771 or case@brochulaw.com is how you can get in contact with Chris. Chris, a couple minutes to go, but what do we got coming up next week? There's a possibility that you could get your student loans wiped away. Is that what we're talking about next week? Tell the people a little bit about it.
Next week, particularly, and everybody get back in your chair at home. I'm sure they just fell out of it. They said, what? We're getting free student loans?
It's called a tease, Chris.
It's for profit schools. And the reason why it's so important is we're going to talk about it next week, but there were a number of for-profit schools that were actually targeting our military. Why? Because our military has access to education benefits that our civilian population doesn't. GI Bill, right? We've got several iterations of that bill. We've got the 9/11 bill. We've got the one that Trump came out with that affords even greater access, right? That's actually a phenomenal bill. It gives you basically your GI benefits, they don't expire. Basically your GI Bill, you can pass it down and do different things with it without worrying about it expiring. But the biggest thing that we need to talk about is there was a case, Sweet versus Cardona. And if you're listening right now and you or your loved one, right, your military family, anyone in your military family, friend, spouse, otherwise, went to a for-profit school, whether it was associates, undergrad, technical college, right? Think of ITT Tech, Le Cordon Bleu, whether it was for a degree in law or medicine or anything like that, you've got to go to this website, predatorystudent.lending.org. It was this case that the Harvard Institute put on. They have this predatory student loan research institute. They sued the Department of Defense, and they've now got a settlement in place. Anybody that filed a borrower defense to repayment application with the Department of Education before June 22nd, 2022, if you went to one of these for-profit schools, you can get your loans waived or your money reimbursed. And here's what happens. The federal government reduces it or waives the debt, and then they go after the for-profit school to collect the money that they defrauded you with. If you're a military family, you got to have this on your radar. You've got until July 28th to file a claim.
Absolutely. So we dive more into that next week, but just keep in mind, if you want to look up and see if your school's on there right now, predatorystudent.lending.org. University of Phoenix is another one you can find on that list. So check that list out. But we'll be back next week to talk about it. Same time, same place, protecting military families with Chris Brochu. Chris, thanks for joining me. Enjoy your 4th of July, man.
You too. Everybody stay safe out there.